Oh, I tell her all the time to decide this is supposed.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Stratford Public Schools Board of Education Finance Committee Workshop Number 3. My name is Amy Wiltsey, Finance Committee Chair, and today is Wednesday, February 15th. Tonight's agenda includes a review of purchased professional services, the review of facilities, property services and utilities, as well as a review of special ed budget, transportation, tuition, and other purchased services. Before we get started this evening, I would like to call on our chair, Ms. Andrea Corcoran.
Good evening, and please pardon my voice. The Stratford Board of Education acknowledges that language was used at our last finance meeting that may have caused some members of our community to feel disrespected. Though this was unintended, we do strive always to show respect to our community through both our actions and our words.
Thank you. Okay, first on our agenda, review of purchased professional services. Ms. Mangini.
Good evening, everyone. Good to see everybody here this evening. We are, as Ms. Wilsey pointed out, covering these areas of the budget this evening. I will begin walking you through some of the purchased professional service accounts. Then Mr. Ruggiero, our facilities director, will do the review of facilities, property services, and utilities. Then you'll hear from me again to talk about regular transportation, tuition, and other purchased service accounts. And we will end the evening with Ms. Borges covering the special education budget review. As you know, as we set these workshops up, our intent is to make certain we get through every single account so that we can give you a little bit of an overview and you have the opportunity to ask questions on those areas. And once again, this evening, we ask that you just hold your questions. I'll stop after my presentation, and each presentation we will take a breath and give you an opportunity to ask questions. So in your budget book, this is the summary. We've highlighted the accounts that we will be reviewing, and this is reflective of what you will see in the 300, 400, 500, and 600 sections of your budget book. So we're first going to start with the 300, which is the purchased professional services, which covers all of these areas. The clinical costs will be covered during the special ed review. And in service and professional development, you may recall that last week that falls under the curriculum budget, and Dr. Gata did address those accounts. And then Mr. Ruggiero will talk about plant maintenance contracts that also fall under the facilities budget. So that basically leaves these areas. These last four numbers are what we call internally key codes, and those accounts are throughout the book, so I'll guide you a little bit. I'm going to first just mention the account number 0597, which is the school physician budget, and that's on page 46 of your budget book. And you'll see that that's basically being left level funded for fiscal year 24. And also, I believe on that page is the account code number 1130. That's the cost for the athletic trainer, and in 2021, we did go out to bid for that service through the town's purchasing agent. So fiscal year 24 will bring us into year 2 of a 3-year contract. So the increase that you see there is reflective of that bid and the agreement that we subsequently entered. Legal services is shown on page 50 for both. I'm just going to check because I'm not sure if I had this for you. I did. Okay, my apologies. Let's see. Nope. Wasn't sure if I actually had another slide for you that showed what I'm speaking to. But the legal services is shown on page 50. And it is broken down for both special education and regular education. There's a reduction in the SPED legal service line item, a slight one this year of $20,000, and that's based on the history over the last few years. As you may recall, when I arrived here, we weren't separating special ed legal costs from regular ed, and the main reason we determined it was best practice to do that is because when we do our state report at the end of the year, we are asked to report all costs associated with special education services, including legal fees. So that was the main reason. And now, of course, by doing it since fiscal year 21, we do have some history that we can look at to see what our costs have been. The regular education side of the legal service, which is also administrative legal services, is level funded this year. There will be 2 union contracts that we will be negotiating in fiscal year 24. It's both the nurses and the CIAs, which typically take a little bit less time than the larger union negotiations. So we do feel that the dollar amount will be adequate for the year. And 0757 is purchase professional services. And this account covers funding for our BOE meeting tapings, as well as our food service consultant. And as you may recall, last year you did add funding in there for the superintendent designated professional services. So you do actually see a slight reduction in that amount for next year. I think I've covered everything on these accounts, so I'm going to pause here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might want to ask.
Mr. David?
Great. Hi, Pam. I'm looking at page 43 on legal services, and I see a reduction. You said you're keeping things level funded, but I see a reduction here.
The reduction in the line item for special education is $20,000, and that's based on history. But, so it went from $120,000 this year to $100,000, and then the administrative regular ed side was $120,000, and we level funded it at $120,000.
So if you can go to page, go back to your presentation on legal services here, though, I'm seeing it.
This is, yeah.
20,000 for special ed.
There, okay.
5,000.
I see where you, all right, I see where you, okay, fine.
Okay.
Thank you. I did have 43 and 50 at the same time.
That's okay.
Mrs. Vidal?
It's a lot of info.
Just a quick question about the legal services. Do we have a retainer agreement with the attorney that we use, or do we pay by the hour?
We pay by the hour.
Ms. Mangini, I have a question also regarding comparison and expenditures from 2021 and 21-22. Can you just give an example as to why there would be a $40,000 increase in legal services in a year? What types of?
For the actuals, if
Yeah.
you don't mind, I'm going to grab my book.
Very visual. It's page 43.
Thanks. And thank you to my secretary, Susan Hughes, for making certain we numbered the pages this year. It sure does make life easier. Okay, the 25 from fiscal year 21 to 22.
Yeah, page 50, the first 2 columns there. There's an increase of 56,000, and it's just a huge jump. So I was curious what examples might be given.
I would have to check to see what our actuals were, but there's a couple of things that could play into that. First of all, in fiscal year 21, we had a hybrid schedule for the most part for school. So we very much had different types of things going on, but it could also be a result of maybe fewer contracts being negotiated that year. And honestly, with legal fees, we really never know when we're going to have to get involved with our attorney for advice and guidance, so it could be that as well. But I'm happy to take a look back, and if there's anything that really jumps out at me, I'll share it with the board. Thank you, Finance Committee.
Any other questions with regard to purchase professional services? Okay.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Mr. Ruggiero.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Tonight we'll be looking at the facilities of paper towels and stuff like that we all need. So here are line items: extermination, fire extinguishers, all things that we have in the schools that we have, some stuff we have contracts for. If you look down at the energy conservation and professional services, you'll see a $53,000 savings was our lighting contracts that we had. So now those are all paid for, and those were schools that we put LED lighting in for money savings. So now that those are closed out, we'll show the 53,000 savings. We still have one more to go, which will be up in.
Page one, yeah, I was just gonna say, page 132.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
that's okay.
I didn't put the pages down.
That's okay.
On my, and it should go after, all that after the, in a row.
Keeping us on our toes.
Yeah, there you go. Other than that, most of our stuff is pretty standard. Not much changes year to year. We're still buying the same amount of stuff, and we're still looking to purchase stuff that goes, chairs, furniture, stuff like that. Again, here, same stuff. We're custodial supplies. You'll see custodial supplies, prices for custodial supplies have gone up. A lot of stuff is still hard to get. So when we do find it, we tend to want to purchase a little extra.
Like we do too.
Yeah, it's just, it's a little bit crazy with all the product. And we do use other vendors, several vendors that we'll buy from, because we just can't depend on one all the time. And utilities. So electricity, we're locked in, and I think we've all discussed this, we're locked in at 7 cents till November of this year. Our water, not much of an increase at all in water. Our gas and heat is, everything that's going on, the price of natural gas is going crazy. We tried to estimate the best we can to where we are. What we will be, maybe, who knows? So these are, and I'm sure Bob will have questions on this, our gas and our electric. That's kind of all the facilities. And that goes, whoop. And that's what I have. Questions? Go ahead.
So I think we had talked about this a little planning. You got a big jump in electricity. Obviously, rates are going up. But most of our schools have solar panels.
So tomorrow, because I knew you were going to bring this up, tomorrow Pam and I actually have a meeting with the solar company to discuss what our savings. I do have a readout of what they gave us, but we need clarification on all the numbers. So Pam and I will have a meeting tomorrow, and any information we'll be able to get to you.
And were our solar panels leased or purchased?
They're actually leased from what I was told. So the solar now is all through the town. The town actually hires the company, Con Ed, to do all the install and the maintenance on it and everything else. That now goes through the town. It used to come through the Board of Ed when DBS was doing it, but we don't use them anymore. So now everything goes through the town.
And then just based on our gas heat, I would assume all of our facilities are heated by gas, no electric?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, everything is gas, no more oil. Tanks are gone.
Electric though, correct?
Well, so, yeah, let me back up. Stratford High, state of the art, it's all run by electric. So you'll see an increase in electric at Stratford High. Everything is run on electric. There's no gas there.
Was there a reason for that?
That was how the contractors built it in when they designed it to be a high efficiency building.
So it was supposed to be
Correct.
more efficient with the
Correct.
electric, yeah? I mean, electric is not what it used to be, so,
Agreed.
yeah, okay. Okay, thanks.
Mrs. Lance, would you read it?
On page 133, the last entry is swimming pool supplies.
So,
And please tell me if I'm wrong. Didn't we, and I know this is when Mrs. Rodeo worked very hard on this, finally have the pool taken over half of the time by, isn't the town paying for some of that? Could you
they
explain that to
do.
me?
So the town does pay for part of it. They pay for part of the electric. Most of the pool supplies, which don't amount to a lot, we pretty much pick up the cost to it. So the town is picking up costs to run, heat the water, run all the machinery that keeps everything up to par.
So there still is a partnership with the town?
There is, absolutely.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, we'll start with which rates will we start with? The electric rate. So it's at 7 cents till November of '23. And do we know what rate it goes to, or
I
is that?
don't, because again, all the rates are now purchased through the town.
Okay.
So they'll figure out what's gonna be the best price at whenever they go.
And I guess through Pam, I think it'd be a fair question to ask Mr. Timiak over the town, just to give us a number to plug in there, so.
I am in communication with Phil Ryan, Chris, and Dawn, and we have been looking at the market and whether or not we should try to lock in, and it fluctuates. Right now, the town pretty much has decided to continue monitoring it and maybe take a look sometime in March or April. So we've talked about it, and based on, don't forget, we do use DBS as our energy consultant to guide us on these utility projections. And they do know the market as well. So between what we received from the town and the information from DBS, that's how we came up with these.
And to dovetail on that question, on the gas rates today, do we have a locked-in rate today? So there's no, we don't know next year, we have a current act going on and just trying to.
It's a little more challenging with natural gas. I've reached out to a number of my colleagues in other districts, and they're all finding the same challenges with locking into natural gas, and they're also finding that it's really not necessarily saving them money in the long run. So we're monitoring that, and we continue to, and again, I have been trying to work very closely with the town purchasing agent.
And okay, just got one last one. So you mentioned we're not using DBS, and you said
We're not using them the way we
Right.
used to for
Okay,
that
okay,
project.
okay.
Yes, that did sound contradictory.
DBS used to lock in the prices.
Right, they used
for
to lock in, so we're using the town's
Correct.
stuff, but we're still talking to DBS.
As far as numbers.
As numbers,
Right.
okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Okay.
Mrs. Cupie had her hand up, and then Mrs. Bedell.
Okay.
Oh, so, two things. One, just to, before we forget, Mrs. Lynn's question about the swimming pool supplies. Can you give us an explanation behind the proposed increase?
So
And you confirm that the town is picking up part of the tab, but I assume that's not included here. What's here, this 15,000 is our portion of the total?
Right, so increase in pool filters. We just had one die on us. I can tell you right now, they're like $7,000 to $8,000 just for a cleaner that self-propels through the pool. We used to use a certain gas to filter into the system. We no longer can get the gas from the company here in Stratford any longer. So now there's a different system that we had to put on, and it wasn't a large cost, but there's other products that we're using now to keep the pool clean.
Okay. And then my second question is around, on page 132, I believe this is flood, right? Flood building,
Yeah,
where it says
yeah.
cleaning contract. I didn't see that listed
So-
for any other school. Can you
No,
give us
so Flood, since the day it opened,
Mhm.
had an outsourced company doing the cleaning at night. We have a full-time custodian during the day, but at night we have a cleaning company. We had gone out to bid last year. The company that was in there did not bid on the new for a new contract, so now we have a whole another company that is in there cleaning. They have always, and believe it or not, it's a savings on our side to have the outsourced company versus having that many custodians cleaning at night.
So the $24,000 increase.
So that was based on, again, when we went out to bid, this company, since the original company did not bid for it, he was the best, they were the best price. And they're actually great as cleaners.
Okay, and if you don't mind, just one general question. We're not currently doing, I know during COVID, we increased the level of like the way we clean and, sanitize, et cetera. All of that have been normalized now, right? Like, are we back to normal levels and how is that impacting?
Right, so again, when it comes to that kind of stuff, I depend on Kim Velasquez to guide us on what needs to be done. Do the guys still clean? They do. Do they clean more than they did prior to COVID? Yes, they do. And we purchase enough product that I can, attest to that. However, when Kim tells me what needs to get done in the school, we do.
But those kinds of increases would be coming from our grant or COVID funding, right? Not necessarily here.
Well, so the increase is, I'm still purchasing cleaning supplies, not through the grant. I'm still, getting my cleaning supplies through the vendors that we purchase for all the time, which was the same product. Hand sanitizer we got through the state. We had monies for that. We had certain monies for funding special cleaning that we had brought people in to do a lot of cleaning in the schools that we're not doing right now. If Kim says to me, hey, next week we have to up the cleaning and we need to get this kind of stuff done. We're not at that right now. We're back to almost the way it was prior to COVID, but the guys are still the team is still cleaning the schools as much as they can.
But extra cleaning and extra supply, didn't we allocate a certain amount of the COVID funds for those increased levels of more hours to clean, more supplies to clean? Like we had earmarked a portion of our budget for that. So where are we with that?
Two things. One is the increase in facilities budget for supplies is reflective of increase in costs.
Got it. Okay.
And of course, Stratford High School's a larger
Right.
building than it perhaps was a couple of
Makes
years
sense.
ago. So that's the increase there. With regard to those supplies that are above and beyond our normal cleaning, and that was a challenge really to figure out what we were expensing to ESSER. And initially it was very simple, right? We were doing really above and beyond. We were trying to keep a lot of supplies in-house in the schools, but a lot of that funding that we set aside in ESSER, you're absolutely right, it was for the extra time and hours that custodians were cleaning. I think we are, as Rich pointed out, pretty much back to normal. I think we have heightened our expectations of how we are cleaning and what needs to be cleaned. But if we do find that there's something we need that's above and beyond as a cleaning fluid or supply, or if we do need more hand sanitizer, or we do need more wipes, then we will use the ESSER funds for those, because we do have still some funding in those buckets remaining.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna jump back a minute
Go ahead.
here to the electric and the gas prices. Are those the difference numbers, the increases, do they account for an increase in costs?
No, because, well, they do, but again, those are numbers that we get from DBS on their estimations on what we should be, right?
Okay.
They take the last 2 years on what we spend and then come up with the numbers that we have right now.
So
Again,
that's probably based on 7?
No, it's not based on usage. It's based
Right.
on usage plus, I should say, it's not based solely on
Yeah.
usage. It's based on usage plus the anticipated increase in costs.
Okay.
In speaking with Eric, and I know Rich, you did as well as my office, and we did confirm that particularly with the natural gas, from what he is seeing, he's concerned, and this is what he is recommending.
Okay. And just one more. There's a line, system number 1060, energy conservation professional services.
right, so this, I spoke to this before.
Okay.
So we had schools that we brought lighting in for, every now and then, the electric company runs these savings. So we convert from regular lights to LED lights.
Oh.
So when we have a contract, we pay X amount of dollars every year, so the contracts are up, and that's what that saving, you see the 54,000, that's what that is. So we closed out those contracts, and next year we'll close out the last one that we have, because this now falls under the town. they'll be taking care of that going forward.
Great, thank you.
Really quickly, before I forget mine, Mr. David, I was going to ask how frequently we do energy efficiency audits of our buildings. How long is that contract?
Well, again, when we're with DBS, they do not as much as they used to for us. So I can't use them except for estimating costs here.
Okay.
That kind of stuff is gonna end up going through the town.
Okay.
And again, now, so we have the solar coming on all the schools. We'll have those figures of what our savings are based on 25 years and what the costs are and what our monies will get back on a quarterly basis. I should have all that information after our meeting tomorrow. We were hoping to have it done before, they had the meeting before tonight, but they couldn't do it.
And also on page 136, looking through all the water costs, we've got 0954 admin. Why, is there any detail or story behind why that's so much greater than all the other stuff?
I'll address that one, Rich, because I had the same question when I arrived here. That includes the sewer fees that we pay the town for the
Got it.
district.
Okay.
And we're still trying to get a clarification on that cost, but it looks like it's going to be pretty much level funded.
Thank you. Mr. David?
Yeah, so the question is, and through Pam and Rich, on the electric, water, and gas, all three, are we bearing 100% of the cost of all of that, or are we sharing any of that with the town of Stratford?
No, we pay for all of our own
Yeah, we pay all.
utilities.
Be nice.
No, that's why I just wanted to clarify that.
But
Because I know we do some shared cost in certain.
We do that only for the flood pool, as Ms. Berdia recalls. That was the agreement, and when I first arrived here, we worked with DBS to get another meter installed at flood so that we could estimate or know what that cost was, and we do adjusting entries each month between the town and the Board of Ed for 50% of that cost.
But the water.
Everything else we
Okay,
pay for.
just wanted,
Yeah.
thank you.
Question? Sure. Oh, did you?
Go ahead.
Okay. How often do we have outside groups, organizations using our facilities? Like how?
You know, I don't have a list. That I would have to get that through the rec department of who comes in to use it, because most of anything that comes in outside of the schools, students themselves, goes through the rec department. I don't have that number for you right now, but I can get that from Amy.
So I assume they're being charged.
They
So
are.
we don't have any record of how much people are charged to use our facilities, and
Again.
also are they providing their own, supervision, or are we still having to provide someone to supervise the building while it's being used and paying for that?
So we always do have a custodian open the school
Mhm.
to let everyone in. And these are weekend events.
Mhm.
If it's a nighttime event, like a Thursday night basketball game at Worcester, the nighttime custodians are there, they're covering it. They don't need to stand
So
there
it's
and
not
watch the
an
game.
extra, okay.
Right, but if it's a weekend,
Mhm.
I have to bring in a custodian, open the school, make sure everything is operating correctly.
Mhm.
Again, costs, I don't know what the rec department charges everyone to
Mhm.
use the facilities. That would have to come from Amy at the rec
But do you
department.
know if we're billing for those hours at least?
Well, of course,
Like,
I'm only getting billed for my guy to be there.
I meant to the rec department then. If we have to bring someone in, you said on the weekends.
Yeah,
to
and they pay
open
for
it up.
that.
They do pay for
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
That's what I
yeah,
was
they pay for that. Again, if it's during the night, on a weeknight,
Mhm.
our guys are there working.
Already.
They're already there, so there is no charge.
We do have a process in place
Yeah.
that we do provide them with a list of the overtime we've paid our custodians for those events
Mhm.
that are outside of the school day that they are charging groups for. And the town then handles all that billing, but we do get our funding back for that overtime.
Any hands raising?
You
Okay.
were, Mr. Henry was next, and then Ms. Carpanian.
So just following up on the water conversation, the number of schools, 3 or 4 particularly, had huge jumps in their water usage. Is there a reason for that?
So, we did have an issue, probably looking at an elementary.
3 of them.
Right, so we did have an issue with water. We've had some, because as you know, most of our bathrooms are all getting bathrooms. We did have, but not knowing to us until the bill came out, but then the town picked up and found out that we had a problem with leakage. So water was running 24 hours a day. It wasn't until we got the bill and somebody, they come to me and what's this huge increase? So I get the town in there, because that used to happen several of times with irrigation systems that we don't know.
Worcester.
It's running, right? At Worcester. And stuff like that. And it happens every now and then, and we don't pick it up until I get the bill. And then the town went in and found out what the problem. But that same problem also happened at Honey Spot. We had a huge leak there, but water main broke when they were digging out the oil tanks. That kind of stuff. That's where a lot of that water use, especially at one of the middle elementaries in particular.
Looks like Nichols had the biggest percentage.
Nichols, they did, yeah, and that was a couple of the gang bathrooms that were running 24/7 until we picked it up in the bill.
And then, jumping back to the maintenance plan services and equipment service, I know you might already answer this, but you had said that obviously with, supplies are more expensive, they're both, jumping up a good chunk. Is that solely because of the supplies, or because we're making some extra efforts to stay on top of our maintenance?
No, it's actually, believe it or not, the cost of certain materials that we purchase are just through the roof. Gloves. We go through a lot of, latex gloves, paper towels, and toilet paper. Trying to get that, it's impossible. So when I do have it, and they say, hey, I have 50 cases or 150 cases, I'm going to buy it because there's no telling when I'm going to be able to get it again.
Okay.
And we're still at that. It hasn't really stopped yet.
Yeah, I see a lot of that in my business.
Yeah.
Some stuff goes down, but some stuff.
Last year's CDX was $60 a sheet, and I just bought some for 30. So,
30.
or 23 rather.
13, go to Home Depot. And then just the last question is, with these added expenses and costs, yeah, I know Ms. Mangini, you had said there's still some money in the ESSER buckets. Why aren't we expensing more of our cleaning supplies into the ESSER bucket?
Because the ESSER bucket should be used for COVID-related expenses. So when they were the cleaning supplies that were over and above, the way the state explained it to us is that they're going to, when they do their audits, and they have every intention of doing audits of all these ESSER grants, they're going to look back at our budgets to see what we averaged for our supplies, and they would anticipate or expect to see our ESSER expenses being over and above, and that our actuals from our budget should pretty much be what they've always been. So that's how we have been guided. But honestly, if it's something, as I said earlier, above and beyond, that we are doing more cleaning or we need to bring more people in, something that's related to the pandemic, then it most certainly is being expensed.
But a lot of the costs are hypothetically being equated to COVID-related issues. So in a sense, the added costs are COVID-related.
That's true, maybe for increases, and maybe we'll go back and talk to the state about that, but I'll be honest, whenever I do grants, and I'm very, very careful about them, I always have been, my feeling is I need personally to be able to justify that cost publicly and clearly and distinctly without question, because if it's a gray area, then you probably shouldn't be using that grant money for it. However, we do refer back to the state frequently, and most recently that was the guidance that we received, but I'm happy to go back.
I'm sure the taxpayers would appreciate anything we can push.
Yep, I do understand that.
With that, let us know.
Just to kind of go back to the question Mrs. Wilsey asked earlier, with the administration water, you said those are the sewer fees for all of our buildings, all of the
Yes,
schools.
yes.
Just a question, why it doubled?
There was, I'm gonna try to be delicate about explaining this, but there were times in the past when, quite frankly, things weren't necessarily expensed to the account they should have been expensed to, and that happens to be one of those areas. So that 35,000, it may have just lapsed, and in the other 35 for the second half of the sewers may have gotten expensed to a different line item in water, but a different line item. So sometimes when you're looking back at past history, and that's why I've come to this board in the last few years with tweaking some of our account codes, because it's very important when you are relying on your financial software system and the information that's contained in there, that it's accurate. Because when it isn't, then it's useless. So unfortunately, this is one of those accounts that perhaps we weren't perfect about where we expense the total sewer expense to that year. But it has averaged around 60-something thousand, and there is a water cost in there, of course, for the admin budget too.
You both had your hands up. You still have a question?
I could just give you some background on the whole sewer a little bit too, if you want. Okay, it's good.
I would love to hear, wait, I would, because my question's about.
So the sewer, we weren't getting charged at all. And then, I don't know, the 22 years kind of blend together, but at one point, we went to just getting charged like a residential customer. Then we went into like a commercial customer. And so it used to be an in-kind service, and now it's billed out by the town. So, and it's kind of evolved that way in the past 20 years. That's the history of it.
A lot of the commercial buildings have flow meters.
Right. Well, the flow meter, sorry, to go to Mr. Henry, I think the flow meter they use is how much water we use.
Yeah.
And I think that was we use that much water, what goes in must come out.
Water in, waste
Theory, yes.
My question is going back to what Ms. Cooper was saying earlier about the people using our facilities. Is there any way we can get data?
Oh,
I would like to
We have
see,
access to it.
I would like
We
to
can get
see
that.
Yeah.
what they
Yeah.
did, how much they got, and how
Absolutely.
much we had to pay, and I would like to see that, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, right there.
Mrs. Corcoran?
Okay,
So,
so the town owns our school buildings, correct?
Yes.
But we still pay a sewer fee, even though they own the buildings?
Correct.
Okay. Just double checking. I'm just clarifying.
I was just curious why we have it in here, if, since we get our money from the town, why would we need to budget that, in here, and why isn't it just a total line item with the town instead of in here? I was just curious.
I think it's similar to what we're going through with the insurance, and it's not uncommon either. I think, towns all choose to do things very differently. They, as Bob was saying earlier, they used to do it with in-kind. And that's how many towns handle the expenses to the boards of education. And here we do use the buildings, they do own them. However, it is like electricity that we use in our school buildings, truly is a Board of Ed cost. So they're not incorrect in what they're doing, even with the insurance. I mean, it hurts our budget, but, and it used to be an in-kind, which means they still got the credit for it from the state, but it didn't hit our budget directly. So, I don't know why they made the shift. Maybe half a dozen years ago or so, it appears, but nevertheless, I think it's the same situation we're facing now with the insurance.
Mrs. Corcoran, did that answer the question you asked?
It did. I won't make you go.
Mrs. Waddell?
A couple of weeks ago, we were notified, I think this is probably the chair, or Pam probably. We were notified that the Aspire program would be leaving Honey Spot, and the costs for Honey Spot are still pretty consistent in there. Is there a reason for that? Are we still using that building for something? What is
The reason for that is that we budgeted status quo because we are in discussions internally about utilizing that building. And there are some ideas floating around, and we really want to tighten them up before we come to the board. But obviously, before any final decisions are made, it will be shared with this Board of Education.
Thank you.
Mr. David?
Yeah, I think I just want to kind of make a statement. It's a slippery slope on the in-kind services that the town of Stratford gives us compared to other towns. I look at Milford and Trumbull, who both have their own plumbers, air conditioning guys. They have their own maintenance department. We rely on Public Works to have that. And I think from an efficiency standpoint, it works a heck of a lot better if it's one town and you can do business that way. So yes, they rent out on a Sunday, it might be a church, it might be a dance recital at Flood, right? You go by Flood, there's a zillion cars, and it's summer months, and there's gonna be a lot of air conditioning used and everything else like that. And I don't know what the rec department, I believe, and you guys have to correct me, the rec department just pays for our custodian. They don't pay for the electricity or everything else like that. We don't get the fees for the rental. So, I just, for the amount of money it is, and the 129 million, I just don't want to get kind of nickel and dime. Let's put
But
it
we
that
don't
way.
know what that number is, and I think that's what a couple of us were
And-
asking.
and that's
to
a
give
fair
in
question.
Context, what that looks like, right?
It's definitely a fair question, but the money does not come back to us, except for the cost of the custodian. And I agree with you, there is a cost. We don't know, I don't know how much to run Flood on a Sunday costs in the middle of July when there's a church using it or a recital, they're renting it out, so.
Yeah. Mrs. Kuby?
So my question is for Mr. Ruggiero. You mentioned at the beginning that you work with 3 vendors for supplies, I believe you said. Are those contracted agreements that you have in
Only
place, or you have one? Okay. So when we're talking about the cost of certain things, with inflation and all of that, like, are you flexible to just go wherever to purchase your supplies? as
No,
long as you
I
can get it?
purchase supplies at the best price I can get, if I can't get it from our contracted vendor. So if he tells me he cannot get me any latex gloves for, he has no idea when, I can go to one of my other guys and say, here's what I need, can you supply me, how much is it? And then I weigh that cost of what I pay from the contracted vendor. And a lot of times, his prices are better.
But you're not
We're gonna be
going-
going out to bid on that, actually we already are, for supplies, and see what happens that way there. It's about time to go out to bid for it anyways.
We do
So you never-
primarily use the
Yeah.
contract, the state contract for those vendors.
Mhm.
It's just most recently, Rich has really struggled with trying to get products, so our purchasing clerk, who is,
People are not happy if there's no toilet paper in the schools.
but our purchasing clerk is truly someone who watches every dime. Taxpayers should really love her. You ask her for paper clips and you don't get a box, you get a little envelope full because she's going to monitor them. But I share that because she takes what she does very seriously, and she will, in fact, shop around. But last year, we took a list of the items that we use the most, because we were recognizing that, for example, the purchase recs that I approved had all different levels of trash bags, and I couldn't understand the price differences. So in meeting with Rich and Michelle, our purchasing clerk, we came up with a list of the most commonly used custodial supplies, and we went to 3 companies, and we got individual pricing, and we did more or less an informal bid, and then we compared them to the state contract. So we had those vendor prices should we have to go to those other companies, but we were just talking last week about doing a formal bid, and we've worked with Phil Ryan over at the town. We'd really like to try to combine with the town. I think some issues were because of dispensers with like paper towels. We weren't necessarily utilizing the same product, but we're trying to find those efficiencies for going
So
on
for
to
these
bid.
things, you have to do like a bidding process. You're not able to say, like Mike said, go to on HomeDepot.com and order. You're not allowed to do those.
We can.
Okay.
It's not, if it's best price. I mean, I'll call Phil and we'll keep him in the loop so that he knows what we're doing. Because we try to obviously stay within all the purchasing rules, but it's usually easier to just use the contracted, the contracts from the state and those vendors. But what we have found is not only sometimes do they not have the product, we have discovered that sometimes those prices are not the best prices. So when it's a product like things through custodial supplies, we want to make certain, since we buy so much of it, that we truly are getting best pricing. We just want our dollars to go as far as they possibly can. So we really are very much on top of all of that.
Thank you. And if I can just make one small comment, back to the question Lisa brought up about, the numbers jumping. And Pam, ever since you've gotten here, I have to say how much I appreciate the work you have done in cleaning up our line items. Like every meeting we would have Pam come to us and say there was a bunch of stuff lumped into this line item that really shouldn't, and she's been taking her time to really, really be detailed, and that's, it really, really helps towards our efforts in creating transparency in our budgeting process, and I greatly appreciate all of that work, so thank you.
You can never be too transparent. Are there any other questions for Mr. Ruggiero? Thank you for being up there for so long.
No problem.
I took my book this time. Okay, we're going to be talking about a couple of accounts that overlap. This is the transportation that I know the finance committee members have gotten some responses to. And this is another one of those areas, to Janice's point, that when I review our budgets on basically a weekly basis, but I was struggling a little bit last year with trying to clarify the encumbrances versus the actual expenses of our transportation, and not to get into too much detail, but at the end of the day, I couldn't understand why some accounts were overspent, some weren't, and we finally really dug into it, working with my secretary, Susan Hughes, who's also our transportation supervisor, and she's very much on top of this on a daily basis. But we took a closer look, and we both agreed that the way Durham at that time was invoicing us just wasn't giving us the information we needed. Durham's been a great partner. We reached out to them. They're now giving us a more itemized by bus run invoice for the past year, and it's a weekly invoice. So we take that information, and as we met with the AP clerk, we realized that what was happening is a percentage was being used that was developed probably 10 years ago. So we got the Durham bill. They expend so much to the regular transportation line for elementary, so much to the middle school, etc. Well, those percentages were greatly off, only because times have changed, things have changed. Maybe our special education portion of it became a little bit higher, and subsequently, that's why our numbers were off a little bit. In total, the dollar amounts were correct, but the question was, why is there a savings of 167, which you will see for the total, in transportation? Very valid, because you don't normally see a reduction. We do have a very good contract going into next year. It's a 1.5% increase, which definitely helps us. But what we discovered was that some of that 2.9 million, you'll see on another screen, that we paid for our regular education, some of that, quite frankly, should have been expensed to the special ed in-district line. And again, it was all about percentages. So we are making adjustments. We made adjustments going into this year, but that's why you're seeing this reduction here, and a very small reduction in the special ed line, where you might have expected to see a little bit more, since we do have less out-of-district placements. So in total, we're exactly where we should be in our estimates for next year. But again, it's just about percentages and being a little bit better with our accounting, and we do have a much better handle on what we're being billed for transportation.
Mrs. Horton.
So those big, oh gosh guys, it's getting worse. So those big jumps that we see in the VOTEC and the parochial lines, is that just because they weren't being expensed properly before?
Exactly. I know, and it's really, I apologize, because it doesn't make sense when you look at it this way, and that's why we wanted to make certain you understood that, but as importantly, I was struggling with my analysis, and it was very challenging to try to figure out what was going on. And honestly, thank you to the lovely ladies that I work with, because we spent a lot of time getting this right, and it is.
Mrs. Lance?
I have a quick question, Pam, about the parochial school. We only provide transportation to the elementary schools, correct?
Correct.
The high schools are on their own.
Yes.
So, if a student lives in the district of the parochial school in the north end, okay, if you follow me, and decides to go to the parochial school in the center of town, why do we have to provide bus transportation when, if our kids try to do that, we would not do it for them, would we?
It's state statute.
Yep.
Okay.
Mr. David?
Yes, have we looked at, to dovetail on the parochial school, because that number's jumping out at me. 631,000, I mean, that's more than transporting to our middle schools, which are both bigger than both St. James and St. Mark's. Have we looked at optimizing the routes for the parochial schools? That's the first pickup or the second, right, the first of the, after the
The waves, yeah. the
second wave two,
tiers,
right, wave two.
Yeah.
That's wave two. It just seems to me
Taking
that
notes.
number is really high.
Let me take another look at that, and I will tell you, as I mentioned, Ms. Hughes is incredible with looking at the best way to transport our students. But let us take another look at that, and that is a big jump, but you can see that we paid almost, $600,000 in fiscal year 22 as our actual, so our budget last year was just off. But I agree with you, it's a lot of money, and let me get a little bit better detail to share.
Can I dovetail one more question? Could you, not off the top of your head, but if you can get back to the board, what the cost of a van is per day versus a large or a bus, whatever the breakdowns are, if we can see
follow
that.
where you're going.
Because I think all of us have seen, we drive by buses with 8 kids in it, and that's X amount of money. Yes, I know we have to allocate seats if they're eligible. I understand the law, but we need to take a look at that. I mean, these numbers are just
Yep,
huge.
I will definitely take a look at parochial.
Mrs. Lance?
Is there a certain date, and I think if I remember this, and I could be totally wrong, so we offer bus transportation to all high school kids, and we know that 50% of them drive their cars. If they let us know by October 30th that they're not going to use the town buses, can we make adjustments to routes and things? Is that
You could,
is that
but you're
done?
really not gonna save any money, because the way our bus contract is set up, we need X amount of buses, and that's usually driven by the elementary. And don't forget, we're on a tiered
Okay.
setup, so that if we need, for example, 15 buses at the elementary, if we're only using 9 of them for the high school, it really isn't going to impact our costs.
Okay, thank you.
Were there any other questions regarding transportation?
I do. So we're going into a new contract, right, for next year. Does that, remind me, does that include any kind of upgrades or anything different that we don't have right now? I know, I think I sent you a note a while back asking about the bus tracking feature that some districts have, where parents are able to, monitor where their child's bus is, or
I think we
what's
should
in
have an
our contract.
offline conversation about that, because there are some things that I think it'd be a good separate conversation outside of budget to have about that, only because there have been some concerns raised about having that system in place.
Okay.
But we can certainly set aside some time to chat about it.
Okay.
The new contract, I will say, was pretty much standard from what we had. We have a pretty in-depth contract that I inherited. It's much more detailed than what I've been accustomed to, but I think it works. It works for the district, it works for Durham. And because they've been good partners, they've been able to work with us when we negotiated, I think we're in a good place. But we did We did tweak the age of the buses a bit in the new contract, so they have to be a little bit newer, and I can't remember exactly what that language was, but I will share it with you.
And does this plan or this budget that we have, this proposed number, does it include any kind of consolidation or expansion of our bus routes for the upcoming year? Is there any changes that's factored into here that impacted the numbers at all?
No, not really. I mean, we will take a look at those over the summer as people move in and move out, if we have to tweak them, and we oftentimes do, but particularly if we have a student who's has to be placed at a different elementary school, we have to make certain that not only can we accommodate them class size wise, but can we also provide transportation if the district is making that decision for whatever reason. So there's a lot that goes into it. So we're always looking at the routes, but I think you're more alluding to a really large review and change, and that's not something we can do internally. There is software out there for that. There are professionals to do that, and I would really encourage us to, perhaps as we work through planning for some potential changes down the road, that would be the perfect opportunity to tie that exercise in with it.
Thank you. And then Ms. Lance mentioned opting out earlier. What is our opt-out process for transportation versus, and the law around that? So I understand the high school level, it's not our biggest transportation cost, but I'm curious when high schoolers are, requesting a pass, right? Does our application automatically opt them out of a bus? How do we evaluate this?
Here's where it gets tricky. If you wanted to consider implementing something, as Mrs. Lance had suggested, not a bad idea, right? It's common sense. However, when you're dealing with state statutes, it doesn't always work that way, because what happens is, let's say 50% of our high school students opted out, and we think, oh great, we need fewer buses. At any point in time, they could suddenly need those buses and want to ride them again, and if we don't have room, now we are violating state statute because we are obligated to provide them with transportation. So there's a whole lot to think through, and as I pointed out, there's not really a savings in money by doing that, because your tiered system is set by the largest runs, which is your elementary.
I mean, I get that, but if you're looking at the data year after year and you're noticing, let's say 30%, maybe 50% of them are opting for a pass, but 30% of those students are no longer taking the bus. Like, how are we looking at how that impacts the number of stops, the number of buses? I'm just trying to understand big picture how we're handling that, because there are some districts where when you request a pass, you automatically get opted out of a bus, even though the statute said, well, you do need to be able to provide it should they need it.
Right.
So it's kind of, well, if you put a plan in place, knowing the data trend is this way, and can you pivot to say, okay, now we actually need to add one extra? How does that, I'm trying to understand the process and how we're approaching it right now.
Right now, we are not doing that, obviously. We provide adequate busing for students who are bussers, who are entitled to ride a bus. And if we discover that, we're getting kind of tight on a bus, particularly at the high school level, because you can't comfortably fit as many students, then we will address that with Durham. To your point, I think you make a very valid point. Let me go back and take a little further look and discuss it with Mrs. Hughes, because I think she has a really good insight on it. Again, I just caution that there are some additional issues that I think we have to make certain that we're thinking through. But to your point, you bring up a very reasonable one about who is actually riding buses. So I will definitely, and I'll pull Durham in, because as I said, they've been great partners. So we'll take a look at that. Any other questions on transportation? You beat to it. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'm going to move on then to our regular tuition. And again, we had a little bit of an adjustment here. So you see that there's a big increase to 1155 and a reduction to 1156. This time it wasn't necessarily an actual error that we were making, but when we submitted our educational financial system report in August, we were told that one of these magnet schools that is not a full-time magnet school shouldn't be expensed to the alternate lines. So we had to make the adjustment, and we're coming to you with a transfer request because of that cost, but we are reflecting it here in the account that the state has asked us to put it into. The other, so that makes up half of the increase in 1155. The rest of that increase is a result of additional students attending out of district choice schools and an increase in tuition costs as well. We estimated some of them at 3%, and a couple of the schools have actually told us what their increases are. So this is both factual and a little bit of estimates in there as well. Any questions? I just have one last area to go over with you before we turn it over for special ed. This is other purchase services. It includes these areas, and some, of course, will be covered under IT, computer services, telephone services, conference workshops we have talked about. So I will just chat for a moment about travel and mileage. You see a slight increase there, and the IRS rate has increased to 65.5%. The vast majority of our employees are paid at that rate for travel. And the increase in the liability insurance we have spoken about is the shift from the town's in-kind service to now hitting our budget for fiscal year 24, as we were instructed by the town's finance director, and I did share all that backup info with you. The athletic and other transportation line. This includes funding for transportation for athletic events and field trips. Dr. Gata works with her team to fund field trips to places like Stratford Library, Booth Park. It also includes transportation for the job shadow trips, field study, jazz and marching band transportation. In addition, this line includes recommendations from our high school athletic director for transportation to athletic events as well. And also included in this line is funding for McKinney-Bento transportation. And honestly, we have had a significant number of students that fall under that homeless act. So we do try, when it's appropriate, to get some reimbursement from a different district if that is appropriate. The law is kind of strict about that, but we are on top of that as well. Those are all the areas for me this evening.
Yes.
So that line item for athletic and other transportation includes what is on page 66 for 1066?
Correct.
Oh, got it, thanks.
We were just trying.
Oh.
Amy, can I go?
Yes, Mr.
Can I go back in time? I'm looking at your choice schools, and I noticed there's a 10% increase from 21 to 22. Are we anticipating even a larger number next year? Or
We have actually had the students that have registered for some of the programs for next year, but we usually look at it from how many seniors are moving out and how do we anticipate the 8th graders moving into 9th grade and what historically have they done. So we kind of take a look again, as I said before, it's a little bit of fact and a little bit of estimates on our
yeah,
part.
because the seniors, we have 60 now, but if I look at freshmen, we have 67, sophomores 72.
Right, and we
So-
don't know who's going to
Choose to go to the choice schools, whatever those choice schools are.
from 8th
Okay,
grade, right?
thank you.
Mr. Peter?
And it is just a fairly small number, but with the McKinney-Bento, we went from, our expenditure was negative 3,300 to 91,45 to 30,000. Are we expected to spend that 30,000 this year?
The problem, and well, I shouldn't say the problem. We estimate that based on history and based on what we know and the costs that we think we're going to incur. We have been very fortunate. Again, I give Mrs. Hughes all the credit for this, but she does try to utilize our drivers as much as possible. Who can, sometimes we have a situation now, almost the New York line where we have to go and pick up students for the rest of the year, and we may not be able to do that with our own staff, and it gets very expensive very quickly. So we try to do it in-house as much as possible. And as I said, we've just had such an increase over between last year and this year, and I look to Mrs. Borges because she is very much involved in it, that we honestly are concerned about what the costs are going to be even for this year.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mrs. Carol Baby?
Kim, you were saying like with the athletic and other transportation, some of what is included in there is like funding for athletic events, like the bus transportation to get our high school, middle school students to athletic events, band, things like that.
Correct.
So that does not come out of like the sports expenses?
It does for the high school. There's two different accounts in there. Sorry, I don't have them at my fingertips here.
Page 111.
They are, page 111 reflects supplies. That's not transportation. Those are athletic supplies. They're under object code 6, yeah, they're under the 600s, they're supplies.
Any other questions with regard to other purchase services? Okay.
Okay, then I shall turn it over to our sped
Good evening, everyone. Before I begin, I just wanted to take a second to say, I'm up in front of you guys a lot presenting, and I wanted to take a second to recognize that most of the data and the things that you see come from my outstanding team. There's lots of ways to look at diversity, and although I look over there and I see 4 women, okay, that look a little bit like me, those women are diverse thinkers, and they come from a diverse background. So we have a school psychologist in Kate. We have a teacher of the deaf in Jen Alves. We have a special education teacher in Jess, and now we have a social worker in Sam. So the data that you see comes from a diverse mind of thinkers for our special education. So that's where a lot of these new ideas and new initiatives come. And because I'm the one standing in front of you, I wanted to make sure you knew that it comes from a lot of people that are working hard, okay? Now, let's get moving. All right. So, over the past 3 years, I have really worked hard with you guys to improve our communication so that you as a board could gain perspective on the fluid nature of special education. Our working partnerships have helped us provide some very quality services to our students. So just as we review the budget, and as you look at the special education budget, please keep in mind the things I reviewed with you last year. That the implementation of services is mandated by law. That pupil service, we're fluid. Students move in, students move out. We identify new students. People have different needs, okay? And that as a district, I cannot determine perfectly what will happen next year. But I can use our data to give us the best estimates possible to put us in a position to service all of our students in the most efficient and effective way, and to do it in a way where you guys have an idea of what we're going to need and use, okay? By using that data, we're able to make our projections. So one thing you guys always ask me for is to make sure you know our projections, okay? So way back in 2007, this is how many students with exceptionalities we had, okay? Each year, things have changed and fluctuated. okay? I have done an estimate for the end of this year. Because right now, so if you can see, that's 1,305. I think we're gonna end right around there, give or take 5 or 10 students, okay? That's a projection based on the number of referrals we're currently sitting on, incoming birth to 3 referrals, and a little cushion for some students that might continue to move in, that have been moving in monthly. Okay, so I think we're gonna end around 1,305. Right now, your Pupil Service Department services 1,258 students with exceptionalities. That's an increase from the start of the year of 41 students. We have 92 students currently outplaced and 2 in a residential placement. We're projecting about 50 more students between now and the end of the year with referrals to special education, move-ins, okay, and birth to 3 transitions. That's what we're estimating based on our data. So that would leave us at 1,305 for the start of next year, ish, give or take a few. Why is it important for you to really look at what we budget for? Because what you put in this budget, these are the things we do for our students. This is what your special education budget provides that are needed services, required services, and mandated services on the IEPs, okay? We provide special education instruction, direct instruction. We provide speech, occupational therapy, services for the hearing impaired. Some students need one-to-ones, or we have just classroom CIAs. We provide social work services, school psychologists to do testing, transportation, contracted services, clinical services, extended school year services, sign language interpretation, extracurricular activities and field trips so that our students can have access to work with their general education peers, homebound tutoring, assistive technology, testing. We need to update that. Testing changes. It's one of the greatest reasons we have Kate, so she can keep us on top of that. And then instruction, for students in detention or in the hospital, we are still required to do that. The list goes on, okay? We also provide evaluations, psychiatric risk assessments, assistive technology, neuropsychological evaluations, medical evaluations, and other requests under IEPs. Now, we are providing more and more BCBA and behavior interventionist services for our students. We are providing nurses. Sometimes we can keep a student in our school if we can provide a nurse to keep them safe while they have access to their peers. Substitute nurses, professional development, tuition for out-of-district placements, costs for special education service at magnet students. You were just talking about your magnet schools. If there's a student at a magnet school who needs special education services, we need to pay or do that, okay? Contracted nurses, special education, speech, OT, PT services. So if we can't do it, we have to contract somebody else to do it. Okay, so that's where all of those lines in the budget, it's not just a line in a budget. It's a service for a student who needs it. It's a student who lives in your community, who's part of our community, and what they need in order to access their education. So that's why those dollars on all of those lines are so important for you to really kind of visualize and go, oh, yep, that's what we're budgeting for. That's why we're budgeting. All right. As a team, we want to make sure that we align with your strategic operating plan and our strategic operating plan for the district. So when we set our goals as a team align with that strategic operating plan. We have our goals falling under the meaningful learning, future success and community partnerships, and the well-being, okay? And some of that also impacts your service needs. Because if we are going to truly commit to promote collaborative practices across the educational settings between general educational staff, special educators, and related service providers, we need to make sure our students can access those. We need to make sure that if we have a student who wants to audition for the school play and they need support to be in that school play, that we do that. If we have students that want to access the general education class with the ability to do that, they just need some support, we need to make sure we are doing that. So that's a goal for us because that's an important goal to make sure our students all have meaningful learning. Future success in families, and we do this, but we're going to do this even better, and we're trying to hold ourselves to 100% compliance, and that's when you talk about the area of transition. Our students transition from birth to 3 to preschool, from elementary school to middle school. And when they turn 14, we need to start prepping and preparing them to transition into whether they are going to go into the world of work, whether they're going to go to college, where they're going to go, and we are committed to do that. And that means we need to work with our community partners in order to improve that area for Stratford. That's an area of focus. Obviously, we need to align all of our programming services with federal laws. That's something that I can never take off the goals here for us. And then with well-being, we know that we have a lot of mental health needs within Stratford, within the world. There's a lot for us to do in that area, and we are committed to being a part of those teams, to helping and supporting the growth and well-being of our students, our staff, and our community. Budget assumptions that you guys can make as a board. You can assume that everything in there reflects that there are needed services on an IEP. So I didn't put it in there if I didn't know that it was needed on an IEP, okay? That the outplacement tuitions are budgeted at an increase of 3%. Because after doing the math and going back and forth with Ms. Mangini, should we increase 4%, 3%, where do we increase? They usually followed about a 3% increase, okay? And that the service vendors are budgeted at either the same level or an increase of 2% or 4%. Another area that your funding goes into, and this is where sometimes you see an increase in one area because you might have saw a decrease in out-of-district placements. When you see a decrease in out-of-district placements, often those students are going to one of our amazing programs. And I think it's important for you to know and be able to name your programs. So we have the Early Learning Service, or ELS program, the ABA classrooms, the support for the enhancement of pro-social skills, our STEPS classrooms, K through 12, the Primary Developmental Learning Center, or the PDLC. We have Stratford Academy Independent Living Skills, the SAILS program. We have Building Responsible Independent Graduate Experiences for our Bridges program. And we have the Stratford Transitional Resource Integrating Vocational Experiences, our STRIVE program. So as we bring students back, those students populate those programs, thus needing more services for those programs to run effectively and efficiently for each of our students. Where you see cost savings in different parts of the special education budget are because we are working hard to take ownership of our district programs by decreasing the number of contracted services and attempting to hire in-house people to provide more of those services because there is a cost savings there. There's also a little bit more efficacy and control when they are employees of ours. We are working with our vendors to reduce consultation costs and services, and we are reevaluating our district programs all the time. We are always looking at our district programs and saying, how can we make them more efficient? How can we make them better? How can we make them more accessible? How can we help more kids become more part of our community in our buildings? And then we're expanding our current services just to better meet the least restrictive environment needs. So I think I did that pretty effectively and efficiently because you guys have already heard it one year before. So, hopefully that just helps remind you where everything was coming from, where our heart is at, why we want to put these services in place, and kind of where you might have seen or felt the efficiencies on the chart. Now I'm going to ask you if you have any questions.
One of the slides earlier that you went through noted nursing services, and it said that there's two district nurses for parochial schools.
In this year's budget, yes.
In this year's budget.
Yeah, this budget that you're looking at now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm looking at the outplacements for this year. I see they went down from 114 to 91.
Sure did.
Congratulations.
Congratulate Jess and Maggie.
That's a big number. I also see we have, and I correct me if I'm wrong, I see 33 at grade 12, but I'm assuming 33 is 18, 19, 20, 21,
22.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's the 5 years, that's why that number's big.
Yeah.
Just wanted to
Yep,
confirm
it's a whole
that.
extra year now. And more congratulations to the fact that more of our kids are now engaging in education in their school, in their community.
I know we've asked this question before, so I'm going to ask it again.
Okay.
Have we looked at some of our programs in other districts close to us, Shelton, Milford, Bridgeport, and say, hey, maybe we have some outplacements here. Can we get an in-house program and save some money and, more importantly, give the kids a better service? do we have anything on the horizon there?
So as Ms. Mangini spoke a little bit earlier, I'm going to table that for future conversations, but those are some of the things we are talking about. A lot of what would have hindered that initially, Bob, is space.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, so with some of the, I guess, leveling of the anxieties that COVID produced and lack of education during those times, I know we had talked about readjusting maybe some of our evaluations. Are you seeing, I know we've got a number of students moving in, but are you seeing and are we reinforcing some different criteria to which we gauge our students with exceptionalities so that maybe those?
Yes, so right now, we are trending lower than our past years for our identification of students referred to special education. Why? Because we are improving our robust MTSS program, so sometimes when you get referrals, we don't go right to testing. We say, you can get service within the tiers and the intervention, we can come back if you're not showing improvement. Because you're correct, over COVID, some of the slides and slips we saw in academics might put you behind, but that doesn't mean that you have a disability that's impacting your learning. So yes, our psychologists are doing a fantastic job right now of making sure that we are putting students back into tiers if we need tiered intervention, and that's why we're a little bit lower than we were in the past with our current referrals. Now mind you, I'm saying that very, very gently because we're heading into PPT season, okay? And we do have a bunch in the bank, which is why I am saying we're probably gonna be up around 1,305, but that's still, a few less than we had last year.
And so, are we as a district reinforcing that, stringently reinforcing that through all our schools? I know there are different personalities, different.
We have lead psychologists, we have lead psychologist meetings, and we work on that. We also meet with I meet with the administrators monthly, and then we have our coordinators going into the buildings which sometimes does not go over as well. We love all our principals, and I know deep down they love us too, but sometimes they get frustrated when we say you must go through the process. We need to go through a process, we need to try things, we cannot just jump right to special education. So yeah, we're monitoring all of that data, we work with them, they know the expectations, things are put in writing. If parents and other people feel as though a student needs to be in a program, there's a protocol for us to do that. We don't just pick you up and put you in a program because our job is to make sure you're in your least restrictive environment.
And I do appreciate all the hard work you guys do.
So just a clarification. I understand when it comes to parochial schools, we have with services, any child that is identified or there's suspicion of an identification, we provide the testing, correct?
Yep.
If the student is identified, do we have to provide the services for all students or just students who are residents of Stratford?
So at parochial schools, we don't have to provide any of that service. Okay, so at a parochial school, because that's a parentally placed child, they have nothing to do with your budget here. They get a chunk of money from IDEA. And I have to do meaningful consultation with each of those principals. And then those principals can choose whether they would like to use whatever their funds are from IDEA to buy items to help the students with exceptionalities in their school, or whether they would like to use their money to have services come in. So if they want to use their money to have a speech and language pathologist or a special education teacher, they have X dollars, that's all out of IDEA. As a public school, our obligation is for child find. So what comes out of your budget and this budget is for us to do child find for the parochial schools.
I was on the same thing on the parochial side, but let's go to the choice side as well. So now, the choice side is a little bit different, but now that I see a 10% increase of kids go to choice schools from all the way from Norwalk to New Haven and everywhere in between, how is that straining your office with kids that need services? Because you have to for 504s or IEPs, what have you.
Yep, so we are obligated to make sure they are provided their service. We do that in a couple different ways. Sometimes the school will provide the service and they'll bill us. And sometimes we will, if it's close enough, we might send our own OT or our own speech over to do it.
And plus, I just want to ask you, because I've seen a lot of these personally, we're doing much more via Zoom too, so it's a lot easier, right? I think it's easier for it's a win-win, right?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
it depends on the student's disability.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ms. Borges? Ms. Krupe?
So with regards to special education transportation, have we looked at partnering or collaborating with other districts such as within the regional educational centers?
Yep.
You know, do we do that?
Yep, we do that
Can you
every
shed some
time.
light? Okay.
Yep, every time. So if a student is going to out-of-district placement, we always reach out to the out-of-district placement to ask if there are students within the vicinity that we could reach out to. And then Teresa Piazza, who works on my transportation for special education, would reach out to Bridgeport or reach out to Milford and see if we could carpool and split costs.
And what does that look like in context, just so I understand, like, have we,
Rideshare?
Yeah.
Yes,
like,
we do
do we do a
rideshare.
lot of that, or is it just a few, or?
I can get those numbers for you. I don't know those offhand, Janice, but I can definitely let you know, how many we do. So, there's, especially to further places. So if we are having someone go to the School of the Deaf, right? Like that's a long drive and that's very expensive. So we tend to see if anyone else around us is, and then we'll do that. If it's one town over and we have 5 of our own kids going, then it's less likely that that'll be shared. And it was hard because during COVID, no one would share, but we are getting back into that.
Okay, if there's no other questions, thank you very much. Ms. Borges? And that being said, that concludes our agenda for this evening. Is there any questions left unasked before I accept a motion to adjourn?
I'll ask. And I think, Pam, you may have explained this to us before, but I'm forgetting. Is there a reason why the grant report does not break out positions like the general operating budget? And I think it's of interest. I know we do fund quite a bit of positions through, I think it's the IDEA grant as well, which is not reflected here in terms of, again, just the scope of how we're servicing our students. Do you know what I mean? I just feel like it would be helpful to show some of that as well when we're looking at both documents.
When you're looking at the grant summary, if that is what you're requesting, we can put something together for you. We actually, we track that obviously internally. It's just not a pretty report, so it will give us just an opportunity and give us a little time to just make it a little more readable for you. We're happy to provide it. Obviously, it's not part of this because
Right.
it doesn't affect the general operating, but we can certainly add it for your information.
Right, and it just gives a full picture, right,
Sure.
of everything that we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mrs. Lance?
So Pam, this operating budget shows us that we have how many educators that we employ through this budget, and I like what Janice said because it would be interesting to see how many additional staff we have based on the grants we've gotten. So I think that that's really important to have because I think it's a good idea.
Absolutely happy to provide it.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Second?
Second.
Okay, this meeting is adjourned at 7:57.